Optimization sounds rational, clean, adult, responsible. The kind of thing you'd say at a dinner party and no one would argue with, which is why it quietly hollowed people out without anybody noticing. Because at some point, optimization stops being a tool and starts becoming the frame. And most people don't notice because the version of themselves that would have noticed is usually the first thing to go. For a lot of people, when optimization begins, life stops being something you live and becomes something you manage. You start asking questions like, what's the most efficient way to do this? What's the best possible outcome? What's the optimal path given the data? Which is fine unless you're asking those questions about your personality. Those questions are great for spreadsheets, but are less helpful for being a person. Optimization depends on measurement. So we measure productivity, growth, happiness. If it can be graphed, we're interested. If it can't, we get skeptical. Intuition gets demoted. Preference gets second-guessed. Timing gets overridden by best practices. You don't ask, does this feel right? You ask, does this outperform the alternative? We're all familiar with GPS navigation. It's the optimal way to get somewhere. And because it works so well, most of us don't navigate anymore. We follow. We don't read signs, we don't memorize landmarks, we don't build the quiet confidence that if we miss a turn, we'll figure it out. And now, without that blue line telling us exactly where to go, a lot of people wouldn't even know how to begin. Not like they're incapable, but the skill was just slowly outsourced. Along with the small, necessary failures that teach you you're allowed to be lost, and you'll survive anyway. This is how optimization works in our lives. The more we rely on systems to tell us the best path, the less we trust ourselves to find a path at all. There was a point where I felt this most clearly as a musician. When I was a kid, alone in my bedroom, it was simple. A good song was the one that I liked, and that was it. That was the entire standard. Then I got older, I found community, other musicians, people with strong opinions about what makes a song good. And without really noticing it, I adopted those opinions. Suddenly, every chord had to justify itself. Every progression had to reflect the emotional weight of the lyric. Simplicity felt lazy, and instinct felt irresponsible. Songs were never finished, just endlessly revised. I tried to tell myself that I was just tightening the screws, but really I was adding 100 unnecessary ones. Eventually, I'd go to watch musicians I genuinely admired, and I didn't feel moved like I once did. Not because the music was bad, but because I wasn't very good at listening anymore. I was analyzing. I was reverse engineering, trying to figure out why they made the choices that they made. I couldn't just sit and enjoy a song. I had to prove it deserved to exist. And once that switch flipped on, I couldn't really figure out how to turn it off. And that basically spelled the end of my music career. It wasn't that I lost the ambition for it, I just optimized all the joy out of it. This is where choice starts to feel heavy. When everything has an optimal version, no decision is neutral anymore. There's always a version of you that would have chosen better. So instead of freedom, you get anxiety. And you don't enjoy choices, you audit them. You start mourning paths you haven't even walked yet, which is impressive emotionally, very efficient regret. There's another cost we rarely talk about. Optimization erodes tolerance for inefficiency. It'll make you feel behind, late, or broken. But inefficiency is where human things live. Grief is inefficient. Love is inefficient. Creativity wastes an incredible amount of time. And healing ignores your deadlines completely. Optimization teaches us to see these things as bugs. So we rush recovery, we rush relationships, we rush meaning. And when they don't speed up, We don't question the clock, we question ourselves. Because obviously the problem is you, not the fact that you tried to speedrun being human. And just to be clear, optimization does work in some lanes. Logistics, engineering, systems that don't have nervous systems. Not everything needs this frame. I'm not anti-optimization. I just don't have the personality to pull it off, which is probably why I've had so much time to notice what it does to people who do. I had a boss once. He was a brilliant businessman, he owned multiple companies, and he was always chasing the next opportunity. And he lived and died by a to-do list that he made for himself every day. One single page filled front to back. And the list worked. It guided him toward prolific success. But it never included things like enjoy a conversation, or be curious about the person in front of you, or let this moment unfold. Everything not on that list became an obstacle. Minor inconveniences felt like system failures. Casual conversation felt intolerable. Not because he was unkind, but because it wasn't productive. There was never time for joy because joy didn't produce anything. And optimization didn't just structure the way he worked, it structured what he could tolerate. And then there's my grandmother. She lives by rigid routines. Every day, she wakes up at the same time, she eats at the same time, she practices her spirituality with real discipline, and she vacuums the house at the same time. Seriously. Even her diet is strict, mostly functional, not indulgent. But that structure isn't trying to extract more from life. It gets the busy work of life out of the way so she can actually be present in the spaces in between. That kind of discipline has an end. Optimization never does. It always asks for more. I notice this difference in myself when my attention starts to drift away from what I'm experiencing and toward how it can be improved. When I'm not choosing anymore and I'm auditing. In some moments, it feels like I'm living my life with a little manager on my shoulder. It's just saying like, okay, but how do we measure this? There was a period in my life where I didn't have a car, and I had to walk to work. It was just a couple miles, the same stretch of road I had driven for years without a second thought. But suddenly, it was alive. I noticed shops that I didn't even realize existed before. Greenery that I couldn't even remember seeing. I started paying attention to the trash bins along the sidewalk and imagining who lived there and what kind of life produced those objects. None of this was efficient, but it was strangely vivid, and I couldn't help but notice. When I drove that road, I was so focused on where I was going that I couldn't have described the journey if you asked me. I arrived, but I didn't experience anything along the way. Optimization had gotten me there faster, and it made the whole trip disappear. And I think that's what happens when this becomes a way of life. We arrive at outcomes, we achieve stability, and we hit milestones, but we lose the texture of getting there. Life becomes something we complete, not something we inhabit. Here's the quiet distinction optimization blurs. Meaning asks, what is it worth? Optimization asks, what produces the most? Those are not the same question, and they don't lead to the same life. You can optimize your way into stability, health, approval, and still feel thin inside. Because meaning doesn't come from maximization, it comes from commitment, from limitation, from choosing something imperfectly and staying with it. Optimization is a powerful tool, but it is a terrible master. Used everywhere, it produces people who are informed but anxious, capable but hesitant, and disciplined but joyless. Like a house where everything works perfectly, except no one's home. A life can be well optimized and still feel uninhabited. And unfortunately, there's no app for that.